This week, is 5G really a health hazard? This new network is going to be so fast that we'll be able to download in a heartbeat and stream video to multiple devices at once. In order to allow this to properly take off with high speed and minimal delay, we're going to see lots of new antennas, each serving small areas. And some of them may use much higher frequency radio waves than previous mobile networks. But having these antennas everywhere has given some people pause for thought. They believe that 5G radio waves can cause health problems, and they're campaigning for the rollout to be halted. Now, this protest group is small but vocal, and it does seem to be growing.
If you look at the position of our government on this, you'd think there's only a small handful of fringy academics anywhere in the world who found adverse health effects with this form of radiation. People whose views can easily be dismissed, but that simply isn't the case.
There have been no studies on long-term Wi-Fi exposure, but there have been thousands on mobile phones and masts which emit similar levels of radiation. They include work by world leaders in the field. We spoke to some of them via the internet. From the University of Washington, Professor Henry Lai, a biologist respected by both sides of the argument. He's found health effects at radiation similar to Wi-Fi over 30 years of research.
Campaigners will say 5G hasn't been tested, and if it's not been tested, it shouldn't be rolled out. What do you say to that?
I hear that line a lot, and it fundamentally misunderstands what 5G is. 5G uses technologies that have been in use in all countries for decades now.
How many studies are there out there?
And I would say there must be 2,000 or 3,000 at least.
He did his own review of all the experiments on mobile phones to see how many found an effect.
The type of frequencies that they use, the radio waves that they're using, they're the same ballpark of radio waves that have been used and tested and tested and tested for decades.
Dr. Gerd Oberfeld from Salzburg, a government scientist who's calling for Wi-Fi to be removed from schools in Austria. He too has found health effects at similar levels of radiation to Wi-Fi.
If you go into the data, you can see a very, very clear picture. It's like a puzzle, and everything fits well together, from DNA breaks, DNA damage, up to animal studies and up to the epidemiological evidence that shows, for example, increased symptoms as well as increased cancer rates.
The technology that goes into the antennas doesn't fundamentally change the way that those radio waves behave. So whilst it looks and feels like a brand new technology from a marketing perspective, its roots are actually, in inherent mobile radio technology that's been tested and used for decades now.
And over in Sweden, there's the world-renowned Karolinska Institute. It's where we met Dr. Olli Johansson. He conducted experiments at lower levels of radiation than Wi-Fi and found biological effects.
The UK government will say there are no known adverse health effects from this form of radiation. Is it accurate information that they're giving out in that case?
No, I don't think so.
5G is highly unlikely to cause more cancers than 2 to 4G, and there isn't much evidence of increased risk for 2 to 4G, if any. It is not the new tobacco, it is not the new asbestos. That just simply isn't true.
If you look in the literature, you have a large number of various effects, like chromosome damage, you have impact on the concentration capacity, and decrease in short-term memory, increases in the number of cancer incidences, and so on. I mean, there's a large number of various areas here.
And yet we're told by the authorities in the UK there are no known adverse health effects.
Well, that's very odd, I must say.
Ultimately, is this a battle you can actually win?
There will always be a small number of individuals who do not want to hear from large corporations like us.
His pioneering research work has led him to a minority group who appear to become physically ill when exposed to this kind of electro-smog. They're called electro-hypersensitives.
People with electrohypersensitivity generally feel that something is wrong. You and I, we don't. And the question then is, of course, 20, 30 years from now on, will we have some form of cancer, neurological disease or something? We don't know.
Just because we can't feel it?
No, we don't feel it. We don't get a warning signal.
Just try and describe it for us, the feeling.
My head feels hot, burning. My face feels burning. I feel like I'm going to be sick. My stomach feels uncomfortable. Yeah, and I just feel a very sharp pain at the back of my head.
There will always be a small number of individuals who do not want to hear from large corporations like us.
Can you feel anything here?
I don't feel anything here. All what I feel is just me. Here, actually, I could just think about other things, you know, it's nice. It's just, you know, I feel free.
So when did the authorities here start acknowledging the existence of this?
They did so in 2003. Then they said this is an official disability.
A disability?
Yes.
A small number of individuals who do not want to hear from large corporations like us.
The Swedish government estimates that 3% of the population suffer this disability. Translate that to the UK, and it's about 2 million people.
To try and address the concerns of those who may still be undecided, we've come to this rooftop in London to take some measurements from a 5G transmitter. And we've drafted in some independent experts to help. Dr. Richard Findlay is an electromagnetic field safety specialist, and he's going to be measuring the strength and frequency of the radio waves at different distances from the mast. So first we're going to put the probe right up on the middle of the transmitter.
Yes,
okay,
that's right.
Let's go for it.
Middle, come down.
And your maximum reading was?
550.
551.6%. So basically, if you were to strap yourself to that transmitter 3 meters up there, you'd be getting 5 times the guidelines.
Yes, you'd be overexposed.
Okay, but no one's going to do that?
No.
Okay.
We're about 100 metres away from the mast here, so I would think so.
The man who'll take the readings is an electrical engineer called Alistair Phillips. He runs a lobby group called Powerwatch, which raises awareness of electromagnetic smog. But he's also taken measurements for industry and helped advise the government.
So we're in the main beam. This is sort of highest radiation, is it?
Yes, it's where the main beam of radiation comes down to ground. So we're basically the highest point of the signals, yeah.
Okay, so let's measure it then.
The levels we found in the classroom are well within UK safety limits, even 600 times below, and the government says anything beneath them poses no known adverse health effects. So why are world-renowned scientists so concerned they're now speaking out to Panorama? It's because they suspect the whole basis of our safety limits may be wrong, that they're set according to a distorted picture of the science. It's unlikely you'll have heard of ICNIRP, but it's an international group of scientists which our government relies on to set our radiation limits. But here's the problem. It doesn't recognise any biological effects, so it bases our exposure limits on a thermal effect. In other words, the radiation has to be so strong it heats up your organs before it's restricted. That's why our safety limits are so high.
Oh wow, 14.5. So even over that distance we've gone down by a factor of what is that? That's 50, more than 50 times?
550 down to 14.5.
Okay,
so
down to less than a fifth of the government safety guidelines.
yes.
How responsible do you think it is for governments to set limits for this form of radiation according only to a thermal effect?
Well, I think it's irresponsible to just set standard using a thermal standard. If you just set it based on the thermal effect, you're neglecting a large amount of data.
Right, time to try and make sense of those readings with physicist and cancer researcher David Grimes. So we've seen there that the power drops off really, really quickly as you move away from the transmitter.
Absolutely, and that's what you'd expect. As you get further and further away from a source of light, which of course radio frequency really is, even if we can't see it, the drop-off is really, really rapid. And by the time you're even an appreciable distance away from any kind of transmitter, it's way more likely that your phone itself is going to be emitting a lot more than any of these transmitters are.
Most countries, including the UK, set their radiation limits according to the ICNIRP guidelines. They can't be wrong, can they?
Well, hopefully not, because as you say, governments and in that way whole countries, the entire populations rely upon them, and I do hope that they deliver the right and correct message. However, I know also that they are heavily industry influenced, and I mean their basic message is that if you are below a certain thermal level, then it's all right.
Do you think one of the worries about 5G is that there's talk of using higher frequency radio waves?
I think absolutely. I think people have an intuitive understanding that higher frequency is higher energy. But I think what people really need to be aware of is that this kind of radiation is still very, very non-ionizing. What that means is it doesn't have the fundamental energy to liberate an electron and cause damage. If you want to cause, say, cancers and things like that, you typically need to cause that kind of DNA damage. And the new 5G spectrum is very low energy. It's much lower energy than, say, visible light.
Are they right to set their guidelines only according to thermal effects?
No. That's just rubbish.
But more than that, the biophysics itself, the mechanics of how you might develop a cancer or something, we know that this kind of radiation is non-ionizing. It cannot cause the level of DNA damage that you typically expect or need to cause a cancer. And so for that reason, the combination of epidemiological evidence and biophysical evidence, we don't have any current cause for concern. That being said, it's always good to observe and keep an eye on trends to see what might emerge, but we don't expect anything will.
You cannot put any emphasis on such guidelines.
So, why do we? I went to Rome to meet the man our government seems to favour over its own advisor, Sir William Stewart. He's a scientist who's responsible for the WHO's position and who founded the standard-setting body ICNIRP. He's a controversial character. Dr. Mike Repacholi no longer works for the WHO, but he's made decisions which affect all our lives.
When you say on the WHO website there are no known adverse health effects, is that really giving people a complete picture of the science out there?
When that statement was put on the website, it was meaning that there was no health effects have been established. And when an effect has been established, it means it's been repeated in a number of laboratories using very good study techniques.
But Henry Lai will say that he's found them. Ole Johansson will say he's found them. I mean, there are a number of highly esteemed scientists who say they have found them well beneath those levels. Are they wrong?
If they've published, they are in the mix because every review panel looks at all the studies along with other studies to see if they're comparable with those studies or point in the same direction. It's called a weight of evidence approach. And if that weight of evidence is not for there being an effect or not being an effect, that's the only way you can tell whether there's really an adverse health effect.
But here's the controversy. Dr. Repacholi used to work for the very industry which helps create this form of radiation. Before working for the WHO, he'd been an expert witness for the phone industry, defending their right to site masts in controversial locations.
And just for extra information, we're now taking a reading at head level here on the roof, right next to the 5G transmitter. And the number is kind of bouncing around the 2% mark. So even if you're walking on a rooftop next to a 5G transmitter as we are, you're still 50 times below the recommended safety level.
Okay, yes, that's quite spectacular.
Is it?
Yes. Yeah. That's about 3 times what we were getting near that phone mast.
It's particularly significant for children. Their skulls are thinner and still forming. Tests have shown they absorb more radiation than adults when using mobile phones. And with the explosion in masts, phones and now Wi-Fi, This generation, like none before, will live in it from cradle to grave.
So there you go, some real science which I hope has helped you to understand how safe 5G signals are.
There is a need for a review of the Wi-Fi and other areas.
How important is it to do that swiftly?
I think it's timely for it to be done now.
If it's not?
Who knows?